Hello, everybody, and lovely to see you all. See some familiar faces and many new faces. So it's lovely to be with you today. And so, what we'll do is we'll begin with a guided meditation practice, and I'll keep it relatively simple in the sense of grounding and connecting and arriving, and just kind of creating some space to practice together, and then we'll move into the Dharma talk, and lovely to see you all from all over the world. So let's get started on our guided meditation. So just starting by settling into your posture and feeling your body in this present moment, whether you're sitting in a chair or a cushion, and just feeling the sense of connection and contact with that which is supporting you, and feeling the sensation of that contact. And so, what we'll do to begin is a short body scan, just to notice, be aware of any places in the body that may be tight, and if possible, to relax gently, not forcefully. So, we'll start at the top of the head and move downward. And so, beginning with the forehead and scalp, the eyes, ears, the mouth, and the jaw. Just gently letting go of any tightness. And now moving attention down to the neck and the shoulders. Just gently letting go. And bringing attention down to the arms, the elbows, all the way down to the hands. Just relaxing. Now taking a moment to feel the hands in whatever way they're placed. Feeling the contact of the hands with each other, whatever they're resting on. And just noticing the sensations. Sometimes we can find a sense of ease or even pleasure in the area of the hands. And so just noticing how the hands feel right now. And bringing attention to the torso, the chest, the belly, the central part of the body. And notice if there's any sensations of tension. And again, just gently letting go if you're able. And if not, just meeting it with kindness. And take a couple of deep conscious breaths. And just really feeling the sensation of the breath in the body. And now noticing where you're sitting and noticing the contact with the cushion of the chair. Again, just seeing if there's ease or if there's any tightness. Moving attention to the legs, the knees, the shins, and all the way down to the feet. And just gently letting go of any tightness. And now feeling the feet making contact, noticing the sensations of that contact. in feeling the support of the ground holding you up, the support of earth. So knowing we are part of the earth, we arise from earth element, and our body falls away again. So this is the very core of this being alive, is having this body, this breath, this moment. Also notice the places where body is not making contact with any specific thing other than perhaps your clothes, but just the spaciousness around the body. Sometimes we notice where there is sensation and contact, but we may not notice the spaciousness. So we can also notice the space and around. And if our attention slows down enough, we can begin to notice the space between the thoughts, the space even between the breaths, and the sound. And at the core of this spaciousness is awareness itself, this spacious awareness that holds all of our experiences. All of our experiences are arising and passing away back into this awareness and never separate. And while we may not always notice this awareness itself, it's always here, always supporting all of our activities. It's something we can return to. So we have a little bit more room for our thoughts, our feelings, emotions. You might even hold an awareness of this as the loving, a loving space, a presence, compassionate space, where we don't have to leave anything out. Allowing all of our being to be here, just the way we are. And if the mind is drifting, just gently, kindly bringing the attention back. Again, if you're able, just allowing yourself to rest in this space of awareness in this very present moment. No matter how many times we drift away, as soon as we notice it, in that moment of mindfulness brings us back. And remembering that the breath and the body are always an anchor, always a place which you return to. If you're feeling any kind of strong emotion, just gently offer some kindness. See if you can connect with the felt sense in the body with without force, just gently bringing yourself present in the midst of the way things are. And awareness itself doesn't require us to do anything, to be a particular way. All we have to do is show up. Perhaps we can feel this welcoming quality of awareness, of presence, of just resting here. And if your mind drifts into thought, just notice the thought. You don't have to try to turn it off, but see if you can anchor your awareness primarily in presence through the body, the breath, all that is arising in this moment, letting thoughts be in the background and letting this present moment experience be foreground. And before we close our meditation, bringing to mind at this moment all those in the Los Angeles area who are dealing with the horror of the fires, and bringing our loving kindness and care to all of those who are suffering. May there be safety. May the fires soon subside. May all the plants, animals, and humans be well and cared for. And all those around the globe who are suffering the effects of a changing climate, many wars, people who are hungry, just bringing them all into our hearts. May the destruction soon end. May there be freedom and safety for all beings, everywhere, near and far. May we all find peace in this moment. Oh. My talk focusing on when the path becomes natural. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this today because I think it's important to kind of discern sometimes where the path must be worked with intention, which is really a part of the Eightfold Path, right intention. And then sometimes we have to, with this intention, we realign ourselves with the teachings, with the practice, with loving kindness. And so it's a path of gradual cultivation that we keep returning to, and with our hearts, with our intention, and with the beautiful path that the Buddha has laid out for us. And sometimes as we work this path, it all just becomes a part of our lives. It feels like fish in water where we don't even notice the water anymore. It feels metabolized in our being. And we're just living out of the Dharma in the path for a while. Those efforts begin to pay off. They begin to yield something that brings us into a greater sense of well-being and peace and care. But then sometimes without even noticing it, sometimes it just falls away. The path itself, that can be very subtle. And maybe something jarring happens or something that was unexpected. And then we notice it. We realize that we have maybe drifted away from the path, or it feels like it's separate, and then we start again. And I think the beginner's mind is great. I don't know how many people, different levels of experience are here, the newer practitioners or experienced, but the beginner's mind, that starting over, is such a powerful practice where we just go back again to the simplicity, the grounding practices, the ways in which we begin to just reconnect. And I think that the beauty of that reconnecting is that it's always available. We can sometimes be harsh when we fall away from our intentions or what we wish to do. But yet, as I was talking in the guided meditation, the beauty is we can always be welcomed back into this moment, into this path, if we simply release the judgment or the criticism or any of the yardsticks we may be using. And it's like starting out with a clean slate. There was the first teacher I studied with, one of the first teachers, his name was Sun Sanim, and he was a Korean Zen master. And when you would go in for private meetings with him, he would ask you these questions, these koans, which are these questions that you can't really answer with logic. And he would always say, this was kind of his beginner instruction, he would always say, he would show, like, hit your hand on the ground, and then he'd say, hit the calculator back to 0, go back to 0, then you can see. And so it's like going back to 0. Sometimes that's what we have to do, and that's starting over again and again. And, Buddhism is a multifaceted path. It's a whole path. 2 aspects of the Eightfold Path are specifically related to meditation, mindfulness, and concentration. But the rest of the path is about the whole of our lives and living it skillfully and without harm to ourselves or others, and for kindness. And so the right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort. And so these are this is the way we cultivate. And I think how Buddhism has unfolded in the West is that there is more of an intentional cultivation on the meditative states. That's where the emphasis has been. I think in some ways meditation has been challenging for people, but it really doesn't end there. There's an internal part of the path that we work, but we also offer our kindness to the world, so that there's action. And so the path is both inner and outer. And so just as a reflection, maybe looking at what are some areas of the path where your intentions feel metabolized. Maybe you're living out of it, and there's some ease in the way you're living. And then maybe where are some others that maybe where your intention needs to be refreshed. And when you lose your way, sometimes without even knowing it, and then when you see it again, that refreshing of your intentions. And, we're kind of at the point of a new year, and I did a little retreat yesterday, short retreat that was Bhikkhu Bodhi was leading, and he's a well-known insight monastic, and he was talking about how Buddhism is very compatible with New Year's, the way we make New Year's intentions, in that we realign and clarify what matters most. So it's not just goals like I'm going to exercise more or I'm going to do this or that, but it's like really touching in and reflecting at a new year what is really important to us and how do we enact that in the world? How do we really find our way? And so I think that's, a part of this right intention is coming back and refreshing that and clarifying what really matters and how we live out of it and how compatible that is with this Dharma path. And speaking of meditation, so for me, cultivating a daily meditation practice has been easy for me over the years. But over the last couple of years, I really created intention to up my actions of kindness in the world, because just being aware of so many ways in which the world and our culture can often feel coarse and unkind and negative in many, many ways. And I just started feeling, what can I do to bring more kindness into the world? I try to live out of that already, but I really looked for specific ways to reflect that and to take actions, so I was kind of realigning my values and my intentions in a way that would allow me to do that. And not to burn myself out, but in ways that I think just bringing something into the world of value and the reflection of compassion, care, and kindness. Even small things, everyday things can be wonderful, because I really believe that these acts of kindness have a ripple effect, that really touch out to others. So when somebody's touched with kindness, then they may feel to then take that and offer kindness. And so just as sometimes darkness and violence can have a ripple effect, so too can kindness. And so we can counter that in these ways that may seem small, but can have ultimately a really big impact. And so you might ask, what inspires you most about the Dharma path? What teachings speak the most clearly to your heart and mind? Maybe the compassion and loving kindness, compassionate action, present moment awareness, seeing emptiness and impermanence, or cultivating equanimity. And then the question is, how can you incorporate that more fully to your practice in ways that really helps you to feel aligned with your path? And I think sometimes necessity can be a real motivator. And looking at the conditions of our lives can really help motivate us to really realign ourselves. And so that necessity, I think about, for instance, the example is if you go to 12-step meetings or you know people who are in 12-step meetings, there's a sense of urgency, because people are struggling with addiction and suffering. And there's a kind of urgency to really cultivate that path. And in Buddhism, we have the word samvega, which is actually spiritual urgency. And, when I started on the Dharma path, I definitely had a sense of spiritual urgency because I was dealing with really deep clinical depression that had been going for many, many years, deep grief. And when I came to the path, there was this deep sense that I needed to find something that would support my life in some way that I hadn't found up until then. And it was kind of like the end of the road almost, and I came to the path, and even that first meditation, something clicked a little bit. And on that first meditation, somebody said to me, it was a Zen group I was in, and they said, well, we have a teacher coming next weekend and we're going to do a weekend retreat and you're welcome to come for the day. And so I decided to come for the day. And in the Zen tradition, these, even to sit for a day, you start at like 4:30 or 5 and you go until 9 or 9:30 at night. And there was just this kind of in the middle of it, I started thinking, what am I doing? I thought I've got to be crazy. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what was happening to me. It just felt very confusing. And yet I stuck it out and I stayed to the end. And as I walked out the door, there was this deep sense of lightness that came. It's like something felt lighter to me. I couldn't even put my finger on it. But in that moment, I knew I had found my path. It was just very clear. And there was just no turning back. And because of, I think that spiritual urgency was really supportive of beginning to really cultivate the path in a deeper way. And so the beginning of the path was easy, sitting and deepening along the way because of that spiritual urgency. And then after, about a year or so, I really saw the easing of some of that suffering. I saw how the Buddhist path was beginning to show up in my life. And it's not that it was all gone. It's not that everything was just great after that. There is that realignment, and that touching in again and again is still very much of the part of the path for me. Even after 30 years, finding and coming back to that beginner's mind is always so supportive. And just letting it all go and starting again, clicking zero. And so I think what happens sometimes in the challenge of the practice is that in daily life, we might have little gaps that are between what we expect, what we want, and what is. And often that goes unnoticed. And I'm not talking about the big things like injustices in the world and the big suffering that we've been talking about, but just these everyday gaps that we encounter when life doesn't quite conform, or a person doesn't conform to what we want, or we don't do what we think we should be doing. And sometimes it's almost going unnoticed, and there's a subtle reaction, a resistance, a tensing up, and a kind of stress that starts to develop from this kind of effort to kind of make life fit with how we want it to be. And there's this underlying stress that comes up and this kind of striving to make that happen. And it goes on quite often for a big portion of the day when we're engaging activities and just going through life. And it starts to move us away from the path. We may not see it because that kind of subtle maneuvering is taking us out of the way things are, taking us out of how our life is in this moment. And then we have to. What was that? Okay. Somebody need to mute themselves. And so then we might start to see the gap. And that's where we can begin to come back, and we can begin to just touch in again on this moment. And so much of meditation is about letting go of that kind of control, that need to kind of control that gap or control circumstances. And so when we come to meditation, there is a letting go, a kind of making a home in the present moment, means allowing the way things are which in Zen is called suchness, to be a part of this present moment experience in whatever way it's showing up. And of course, what happens out of that is that then we start to feel perhaps more connected to the path again. It feels more natural, more connected. And perhaps we don't have to think about it for a while or create the intention. But then again, we have to come back. And so I wanted to talk for a minute too about how sometimes we might see the dichotomy of fear and complacency. And complacency sometimes can come up as things are okay the way they are in my life, in terms of perhaps not looking beneath. I remember one time someone said to me, "Oh, meditation is just a piece of cake for me. It's so easy that I don't even really know that it's benefiting me." And I just thought it had this kind of complacent quality, like, "Oh, it's just so easy. I just show up and, well, there's nothing to it." And of course, my suggestion with such a situation like that is like, well, what's underneath the complacency? And sometimes we might look at that as boredom. We might look at that as something that doesn't feel engaged. And so many people talk to me about that lack of feeling of engagement, or that feeling of this just feels flat. I wish there was something more exciting or more where I'm feeling more stimulated in my practice. But I always say, take a look at that flatness. If you can actually examine that in an open way, sometimes what we can find under that sense of either complacency or just that feeling of flatness is something else. It might be restlessness. It might be anxiety. There might be something more that hasn't been seen or known that can be engaged in a way that can really recharge our practice. And, our culture has a lot of messages about fear being something to avoid or control. You've probably heard that choose love and not fear. And, that's a beautiful thing. And sometimes maybe we can choose love. But, thinking if you're in Los Angeles right now or in a war zone, you may not be able to choose love over fear if your life is being challenged, being threatened. But if you're in a position to help, you may then be able to help out of a sense of love and care and can choose compassionate action. But it's not always quite that simple. But what I have observed, and I'm noticing this, we've seen several real disasters over these past number of months. First, there was Hurricane Helene, and my living in Tennessee means that I'm right next door to North Carolina. And so I really watched, North Carolina was so profoundly hard hit. There was so much loss and devastation and destruction. And yet there was this profoundly beautiful coming together of so many people and just putting away differences, putting away everything. Nobody was really just there, thinking of themselves, but just coming together to support each other. And it's like bringing out the best in humanity. And looking at LA, I've seen pictures of people coming in, firefighting teams from all over the world to help. And it really touches my heart when, people are willing to just put it all aside and to help in that way. And it's such a beautiful thing. And like I said, I think that's some of the best of humanity. But what happens is that once these crises end, there can sort of be a return to that kind of more complacency or that pulling away and kind of falling back into conditioned patterns and patterns of division, patterns of just kind of moving back. And I don't think we should be in crisis all the time, but it's just noticing that, we need to rest, but then to look at how perhaps we can bring more kindness and care into the world and remembering, that this is something that can make a big difference. And I think a lot of us are really focused on that this year. And so, I think a key with this practice then is what I talk about with complacency is sometimes sticking to the status quo and avoiding the discomfort maybe of change. Sometimes familiarity breeds comfort, and that can be good in some ways. But sometimes we just get used to it and stay there and may not even notice until a crisis occurs or something that really kind of jars us awake and brings us back to that sense of urgency. And of course, the reality is that there is spiritual urgency in the truest sense, because we humans have a limited time span. None of us are here forever. There isn't a stability of just endless time. And that's really what the Buddha talked about. When he talked about spiritual urgency, he talked about the three messengers of sickness, old age, and death as a reminder that this is the time to cultivate, to not lose, to not stay in a place of complacency, but to recognize that this is the time and this is how we cultivate our practice, because our time is short. And so to remember that is to wake up. And then we can bring our mindful awareness into it. We can check in with our thoughts, and especially if anxiety comes knocking. In these moments of difficulty, we might have binary or distorted thoughts thinking, well, if I do this, then this. Maybe I shouldn't do this, then that. And sometimes that can be kind of a quality of anxiety or fear that holds us back from something that maybe our heart is really asking and calling us to do. And, when I first started meditating, I really, as I said, I really kind of jumped into it. And I took every opportunity I could to meditate with Sangha. I sat at home. I started doing multiple 3-day retreats, as many 3-day retreats as I could hook into, day-long retreats. But one thing I didn't do was a longer retreat, like say a 7-night retreat. And there was a kind of fear that I had around sitting longer. There was kind of a thought in my mind, I can't do this. I'm not capable of doing this. And so for 5 years, I kept wanting to go to a retreat, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. There was fear. And so the binary thinking is, if I go, I'm not going to be able to do it. Or if I go, I'm not going to be able to sleep. If I go, I'm going to have to leave. So there was all this kind of binary thinking and this fear. And I started to see that the thoughts were distorted, but it was still hard for me to really make that commitment. And so what I did to overcome that is that first I just finally booked a 7-night retreat, but I booked it in a place that was so far out and so remote and so distant in nature that you have to be driven out there. And I realized that once I got there, that I wouldn't be able to leave no matter how much I wanted to leave. And for me, that's what I needed to get me to do that 7-day retreat, is to realize that I couldn't leave. And that might sound kind of contradictory to some people, but that's really what supported me in being able to do it. And I had to really notice the binary thinking and just say, I'm going to do it no matter what. So it came back to a sense of almost that urgency and that need to deepen my practice in that way. And so that was where I began to open up to the path and the practice in a deeper way, is when I saw that that kind of barrier that I had created was a narrative that I didn't need to live out of. And so then we can approach whatever is arising anytime we're dealing with fear and difficulty with awareness but not aggression, and with care and ease. Sometimes we have to go really slow. Some of us who have had traumatic backgrounds, difficulties in our lives, sometimes we have to be very gentle with ourselves as we move through the path, and we have to take our time. Sometimes, while the path may be natural, sometimes we have to kind of ease up. Sometimes we have to do it in a way that allows us to bring all of ourselves into it in a way that aligns us with the path, but also recognizes whatever deep challenges we may have in our lives that we have to acknowledge and honor as we go along. Because sometimes that's what pulls us away. Sometimes that's where we may go away from the path, not realizing that some part of ourselves needs to be included. And sometimes that is where the wounding or the pain or the difficulty is. And so expanding that space of compassion and awareness can bring us back in just as we expand our awareness and our compassion to this global suffering and all of the difficulties we have in this world. And then to be on the path then is to realign with our deepest values and our intentions. And we simply come back again and start again and just find the ways to help support us as we move along. And then slowly it sort of becomes natural again. And even the awareness that we cultivate and that I was talking about starts to feel more natural too. And so mindfulness, the word mindfulness, is sati, which literally translates as to remember. And the Buddha encouraged us to keep the path and the teachings in mind. So that too is sati. And then when we have that, then our actions and our path, both our practice and our actions in the world can be much more naturally aligned. And so I wanted to read this short prose from Guthima Roba as I close this talk. This is what can happen to you. When the need to go anywhere else ends, when you are satisfied with where you are, you will stop being a passenger and become a passage, so that everything passes through you without judgment or resistance. Instead of being a wanderer, you will become a birthplace of wonder. And so just to tie this back, what I just spoke about, samvega, which is spiritual urgency, also includes a quality of awe or wonder. Because this deep presence, when we experience, we can appreciate, even in the ordinary and everyday, the wonder of life. And that, too, is a great support as we move on the path. And so I wanted to share a few words about Dana. And before we go into our Dharma discussion. And so for me, I've been teaching for a number of years now, and I teach primarily through the practice of dana or generosity. And Buddha, when he taught, the path, one of the things he emphasized was that cultivating both generosity and gratitude is one of the most important aspects of the path. It creates the foundation for everything else. And so along those lines, the Buddha taught the path of generosity. And so since the time of the Buddha, there has been this path of dana. And so this is the path of giving and receiving without the normal kind of transactional fees that we normally have in so many areas of our world and our lives. And so this allows a kind of intimacy because there is a quality of interconnected giving and receiving. And so the generosity comes from the heart as opposed to a particular amount. We can give out of what we have received. And then we can keep the movement of giving and receiving alive. And it supports the ongoing aspect of the Dharma, because when we support the Dharma through the offerings, through Sangha Live and through teachers, then we allow this path to continue. And it's pretty amazing that it's continued for 2,500 years, and we see it thriving in this particular era, and we need it so badly, in my opinion, to counter, like I said, the coarseness and the darkness that we see in so many parts of the world and in culture, is these kinds of moments of care, kindness, and generosity and gratitude can be such an important part of our own cultivation to create this world that we would love to see. And so we have a path to participate. And this is one of those ways. And so thank you in advance for any offering today. And so I'd like to open up Dharma discussion, and anything you would like to, anybody, if you would have, just put your hand up, or if you want to talk in person or through the chat. we've got plenty of space for questions. So if anybody has, you can put again if you prefer to put it in the chat, you're welcome to do so. But or comments, you can also just share some thoughts or comments. Okay, Lisa Bartlett.
I'm very moved by your talk. I come to these meetings because of the spiritual urgency, and it always is a blessing. I'm currently in catastrophic trauma and grief, and listening to you talk about how to bring it back to your heart was very lovely. I certainly am very grateful for that. It is the best giving and taking. I come back and I touch my consciousness to your wonderful river of mental support. And I certainly am a candidate for a helping hand, but giving and taking the path has made me able to survive. I want to thank you for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you so much too. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry for your difficulties, but I'm grateful that you're here and that you've got the path to support you. Thank you. Okay, Tina.
Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. It was what I kind of needed to hear because sometimes I really go into everyday life with spiritual urgency, but then I end up, like sort of conflicting or something happens and I feel like I'm not doing my spiritual path the right way. And, um, so then I go in to that, even though I've studied compassion training, everything so much, I still sort of fall into that beating myself up. And so it was good to sort of have the, reminder that, and I liked how you described sort of the underneath things that we sort of ignore, or that, sometimes I sort of use my spiritual practice or my meditation to ignore some of the things I really need to be focusing on. So I really appreciate that. And I really don't know that I have a question except for maybe, at a time when politics and people and issues and everything seem to be sort of exploding. If you have any other sort of, key points of how to come back a little quicker. Like I got into a confrontation this morning with someone who let their dog chase these animals in this park. And, I came back after we both exchanged some not great words and, apologized and said, I appreciate you and all of that. But he never got to that point. He said, "Oh, you're old and you're gonna die soon."
Oh my goodness. Oh my God.
So it ended up being, like I could tell he was triggered by it too. And so how do we come back to a peaceful spot when so many people aren't practitioners too? Yeah.
Good question. And yeah, just thank you. That's a good question. And I think, partly I think, especially when those encounters happen, I mean, obviously sometimes we have to kind of come back into like the residual effect of it. It's kind of like it's hard to be mindful all the time. And especially in the middle of conflict and suffering and all the difficulties we're seeing in the world, sometimes we just do fall away from it and we do get into our reactivity. And I do think it's important to sometimes look at what's under the reactivity. What is the care that is under there? In other words, sometimes when we're reacting and getting all upset, maybe sometimes underneath, there's actually something else that needs to be seen that is related to care. And it's heartbreaking to see the suffering in the world. And yet, isn't it wonderful that our hearts are caring and kind enough that we can see that and that we're not covered over to the point of being, just not dealing it like some people would just ignore it. And so I think appreciating that compassion and bringing kindness to ourselves. And then sometimes in those moments, I've found that in those really tense moments, remembering to do a practice of metta for our pain and for the other person's suffering. And so not to harden around it, like harden around the divisions and the difficulties we're in, so it's holding a little bit more space. And so I think it's the sati, the remembering, and then creating that intention to touch into what's really present and finding the care and finding the self-compassion. It's just that remembering, and holding that in a space of awareness. And I do think sometimes there can be a sense of criticism to ourselves. I'm on this path of peace, and I just, it's really messed up. And so that's where we start right there, right? That's the starting point. And offering that and just that remembering and coming back. And to me, that really brings me back faster than anything, is just opening the heart to this moment just as it is. And even if there's shame, be kind to the shame even, because even that, can soften, if we're just taking those moments, to remember and not to say, oh, I screwed up again, but hit the reset button. But it's hard. It is hard, but I think that deeper care, we just keep working it, and it starts to open up more.
Thanks.
Okay, Leslie.
Yeah, hi, Lisa. Lovely to hear you today. I'm going to continue on the theme that and Ilsa said. During the difficult election period, I live in Washington, D.C., and we can be totally inundated 24/7 with the news here. We have all outlets, and it's constant. You have to make a conscious decision to disengage from that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I did that, and I disengaged, and I said, I'm not going to get into the fray of this. It's just not going to be healthy for me, and I'm not going to be able to give anything, I'm going to cast my vote, and that's going to be it. I'm going to stay disengaged from this. And then the results came in. And again, because of my particular situation, I could stay disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
I'm an elderly person. I'm not of childbearing age. I'm white. I'm straight. You know what I mean? I'm not, a lot of people are walking around feeling like they've got a huge target painted on them right now. I'm not. I'm out of that. You know what I mean? I feel compassion for the people that are in that, but it's not me. And so I'm grateful for that. And then I feel bad for being grateful. Because I understand my privilege is not based on any merit at all. Just like everybody else's unprivileged is not based on their lack of merit. But so just disengage. And so now I find myself wanting to stay disengaged, wanting to stay out of it, not wanting to even go to meetings, not wanting to do things. I don't even like going to the grocery store right now, and then there's things like what's going on in LA, and I'm just feeling so disengaged that I feel like I'm not practicing. You know what I mean? You have to be involved in something to be able to practice with it. And if you're not involved at all, if you're so disengaged that you're not involved, how can you practice,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just a difficult position, and I'm not being able to find my way to a middle point, I guess.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're sharing is just like the overwhelm of the whole situation, and then you just had to pull away from it and just kind of unplug from the whole thing. And now you're kind of like, okay. And, sometimes that's necessary to help, kind of rebalance the organism, in a way. But then there can be that point too of starting to move. Like, how can you re-engage? How can you, I went through this thing long time ago when I was in my path. I was in the Zen tradition, and I wound up encountering a couple of teachers who were abusive, and it was a personal thing, and because it was directed at me personally. And so someone that I thought was, hung the moon, who was this enlightened being, turned out wasn't at all. And I remember ultimately I kept trying to engage and stay with the Sangha, not with the teacher, with the Sangha, but there came a point where I had to pull back. It was like the overwhelm of that was such that I sort of disengaged. But what I did was I meditated in a way that was not forcing myself to do anything, just showing up and I let go of my kind of concentration practices and being really sharp. And I just sat in the kind of empty space of doing nothing. And that took a while. And then there was slowly this opening again, this kind of engagement started happening naturally again. And I can't explain, but something as my heart began to rest a little bit, and I gave that to myself, there was this not sudden, but this subtle quality of wanting to step back out. And I had completely walked away from my spiritual family. And then there was a point where it's like I felt my heart pulling me to want to be engaged again. But I gave it time, and it may be that the time just isn't quite there for you yet. That maybe that's just something to trust the rhythm of your heart. You're here today and you're engaged. So I appreciate, seeing you and showing up. But also listening kind of to the rhythms of the heart, and seeing if the fear or the overwhelm or has just needed some rest. And then maybe there's a moment where it starts to, I hope that there is some little movement again, and bringing you back into, so I would just look at that, and maybe trust some of that and see if then there's even, because like I said, you're here now. So it's good to see you engaged in this moment. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.
You're welcome. So do we have, I don't see any other, do we have anybody else that would like to ask a question or just a comment, share a thought? We still have some time. Okay.
Yeah, well, I could share maybe. I really am appreciating this aspect of the natural flow. In light of what was shared by our beautiful Sangha, and just really taking it in and yes, I mean, the sense of urgency, we're getting messages how urgent it all is, and I think the last thing we need is more people showing up, not in a balanced, nourished, healthy place. And when we give into that sense of urgency, we're best of intentions. What is it? The path to hell is laid with the best of intentions. It's like, I'm really appreciating what's being brought forward is this, be with it and enjoy the engaging in our own practice. And from that, we get more nourished. And from that, we're more balanced, and we can then show back up for the things that we feel called to have agency with. The world, like humanity, I'm not sure is meant to take in on a global scale the news that we are faced with. I feel like I am meant to take in that which I can do something about or be part of. And so I'm really trying to work with that within my own practice. And like what I allow in news-wise is, can I have some way to show up and engage with that and have effect on that? And if not, I don't know if it's really helpful for me to know it. And it's not, I don't want to sound like someone putting their head in the soil, like not wanting to know what's happening in the world, but if it knocks us off balance and then makes me withdraw completely, then I'm not even showing up for the ones that I can have.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And it's like, yeah, it's like we don't want to traumatize ourselves by trying to force ourselves to white knuckle it and stay in a situation where our hearts become so overwhelmed that we can't do anything. And so, and because we have so much access to information now, immediate information around the globe, because of just the internet, and we have access instant. And so the heart can be overwhelmed. And I do think, the rest part and the realigning and the metabolizing, of what we need to metabolize is really important. And so that we're not just constantly kind of gritting our teeth and trying to or feel that we have to fix the world and it's all on us, and that's why I was really talking about just looking for ways to really ripple kindness out in everyday life, and really looking for cultivation that isn't only about, just the big things are important, but we can't. And, Buddha asks us to see the suffering of the world, but we can't stand in the middle of everything. And, and it's just our hearts. I see people, are on the front lines constantly. And I see how overwhelming it can become and how polarizing it can become to be on the front lines all the time, because the heart has no place to rest and to hold and metabolize. And so I do believe that that's why we have the inner and outer path. We cultivate the inner peace, equanimity as much as we can, and then we bring that out into the world in whatever ways we're able to. And so it's a mutually beneficial kind of symbiotic relationship that we have. And I do believe that that's one of the most important things we can do. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, someone said local news is important. Yeah, and I do think in this particular era, with the changing landscape of information, that sometimes the local, what's happening locally starts to get missed. And unfortunately, I think bad things can happen locally in our local governments or local or immediate environment that the funding is not as available, and so we're not as informed, and so we're seeing just the big disasters. But sometimes there's a lot happening on a local level that's really really so important too. And then somebody here said, just showing up may be all that's needed. We have the resources to do that, as evidenced by our being here today. Yes, showing up is and I think sometimes recognizing that can take a little of the pressure off of, I've got to save the world, I'm on the Dharma path, so I've got to save the world. No, we do what we can within our capacity. And I think it's Joanna Macy who said something beautiful about this. She has a beautiful quote, and she said, so just do what you can, even if it's small. And she said, that is enough, and that can change the world. Sometimes it's just doing what's within our capacity. We don't have to save the entire world, but those small acts can be enough to make a huge difference. And our practice too, just doing a little bit every day, doing something that we can keep in mind, keep the Dharma in mind. We don't have to achieve the entire path in this, probably not in this lifetime for most of us, but we can all do what we can, and we can really keep I think that's the realigning, realigning with the path and realigning with our heart's intentions. And then Lisa Bartlett said, I'm looking for building friendships from this heart-centered group. And that's really a beautiful thing. And I do think that, one of the things we've been talking about at One Dharma is the meditation group I have in Nashville is just the importance of community, and community where we hold the values of kindness, and creating these communities. So many people have told me, like when we go to on a retreat or have gatherings, that it gives their heart hope. So we come together around something, and we can give our heart hope that there is kindness in the world. There's loving kindness, there's care. And these connections, these sanghas of all different forms can really, really support that and keep us from being our hearts from so exhausted and overwhelmed that, we're just giving up. And again, sometimes we have to take a rest. And I think, as someone said, it's okay to rest. It's okay to rest. Sometimes that's just what we need.
I did drop a couple of things in the chat for folks. Just to respond to what Ilsa had said. I think it's Ilsa, correct? Yeah. Well, our Sangha Life Connect platform is a place everyone can go to connect with the Sangha Life participants. So there's the link to join that. And I also put your website in there, Lisa, if you would like to speak a little bit about what you have coming up. There's time for you to do that too.
Sure, yes. Just to let y'all know, if you're interested, I do have a Sangha in Nashville, but it's also online. And so we have people coming in from various locations, and anybody's welcome to join in. We meet Monday nights. And if you go to the website, onedharmanashville.com, there's various offerings. I'm doing a short 2-night retreat in February on this topic, when the path becomes natural. And so we can find a listing for that retreat on the website. And so you're welcome to, join in if you'd like to do that. We're going to dig more deeply into this topic. And since it's an online retreat, you can join from anywhere. And, there's just various other offerings on there. If you're in the United States, I do teach various residential retreats also, both in the Southeast and also places like California. And so, if you'd like to make a connection, you're welcome to do that. And so just go to and she's got the website up. So you're welcome to join in for that in any way you'd like to connect. So I think that's all I can think of. We might want to, unless, Marnie, you don't have anything else, maybe just a short kind of dedication of merit before we leave. Okay, so let's just do a short minute. This is just a brief meditation, just a dedication of merit, and just taking a moment again to just connect with the heart for a moment, and just connecting with what's present in your heart. And in whatever way you would like to bring care and kindness to yourself, your family, all of us that have gathered today, and perhaps feeling the ripple effect of moving this intention of the heart and of kindness out into our communities, into our countries, into the world and beyond. And may the merit of our practice benefit all beings, those who are suffering and those who are in joy, and reverberate out without limit.